knows Markus. This is the part 8 of Gokuden series on 5 schools. This is the final rye segment. So that's good or bad. What do we go to next after rye?
Ryokai, followed by Nobukuni. So, thank you everyone today. As Chuck said, it's going to be the final rye chapter. We are in installment number 8 and we are still in the middle of just Yamashiro. So I would like to welcome you for the next 8 years for the Gokaden. So today, to wrap up the rye chapter, so last time we ended with Rye Kunimitsu, and today I want to talk about the following topics for the last rye installment. Rye Kunitsugu, very famous master, almost as famous as Rye Kunimitsu. Then I want to talk about the other rye smiths that were active at that time. And then I want to close the chapter with what I call the rye exodus, when rye smiths left Kyoto and established their branches somewhere else. So, as you can see here, Kyoto, the good old center of Yamashiro sword making. And there are several reasons for why rye smiths tethered out and why they left. It's probably linked to the end of the Kamakura shogunate, all the turmoil of the Nambokcho period, and the early years of the Muromachi shogunate. There's a big transitional period where a lot of the Yamashiro schools did not survive. And I want to research this topic further, but for today, I'm going to show you just a few of those Exodus myths. So one of them will be Judo Rai Mitsukane. We will talk about him later. And we're going to talk about Nakajima Rai, Kuninaga. And there's another one, move from Nakajima Rai, which is called Awaji Rai. It's just over the river, another Rai branch, which then later moved to Echizen province. But the Echizen rye smiths I want to talk about when we arrived at Echizen province, because it's a whole different chapter. So today I'm just going to talk, as mentioned, Rye Kunitsugu and all the rye smiths that then left Kyoto and tried their luck somewhere else, near Kyoto. So let's talk about Rye Kunitsugu first. Let's do the good old numbers game, as you can see here. Rye Kunitsugu, 60 Chuyo. But I want to please pay attention to the Chuyo and Tokubetsu Chuyo ratio. Because Rye Kunitsugu has pretty many Tokubetsu Chuyo for his Chuyo. And I'm going to talk about this later again. As is understood today, all these rye smiths, they were working in a giant forge for the masters. So a lot of all the rye sons and students, they were working for Rye Kunitoshi. And when Rye Kunitoshi passed away and Rye Kunimitsu took over, all the other guys started to work for Rye Kunimitsu. So a lot of these rye blades like Kunitsugu and Kunisane, and we talk about later, they were very often working for Rye Kunimitsu. That's why there are not that many blades by them exist, because they were working for the big guy, and he was signing with his name. So that said, let's look at some of Rye Kunitsugu's longswords and try to work out some characteristic kante points. First blade I want to talk about, it's a Chuyo Mumei, attributed to Rye Kunitsugu. It's very much in the style of Rye Kunimitsu. You can see some details in the hada I was talking about. The last time is a Sugu Hacho, with the activities going from the top of the hammer down. So it's not a choji like Ichimonji, where the choji are formed from the bottom up. So it's Sugu Hacho, where the activities go down. And it's very similar to Rye Kunimitsu actually, but the point here is with Rye Kunitsugu, he adopted more the social style. And I want to try to point this out. If you look at this detail here in the next slide, it's a lot of nie. It's a lot of nie and GK. So there's the big old discussion, did Rye Kunitsugu really go to Kamakura to study with Masamune to learn the Sosho, or was it just incorporating the social style in Kyoto because it was the upcoming and most favorite style of the time? Some people say, yeah, he did go and he started with Masamune, you can't just come up with this stuff in Kyoto. Other people say, yeah, going from Kyoto to Kamakura at the time, it takes a 10-day or 2-week travel one way. So other traditions say Rai Kunitsugu went to Kamakura when he was 28 and he only came back to Kyoto when he was 56. So he stayed there for 20 years. But we just don't know. We don't know if he went to Kamakura and learned Sosho at ground zero, or if he was just trying to create Sosho in Kyoto whilst never been there. But he worked more in Nie than Rai Kunimitsu. That's why his nickname is also Kamakura Rai. The next slide, I'm going to show you another Chuyo sword. It's very much like Rai Kunimitsu, but I want to make you pay attention to the details. I try to play a little bit with Photoshop to just get the details out. I mean, look at the steel. All the structures is a lot of GK. If you have a Rai blade that has tons of GK and a lot of Nie, it's still end of Kamakura, the earliest Nambocho. You might go for Rai Kunitsugu rather than for Rai Kunimitsu. The next blade is even more social emphasized, Rai Kunitsugu. It's Sokubetsu Chuyo, it's signed. You can still see the Rai typical Muneyaki on the top, but it's it already tends more to social than Rai Kunimitsu. But often it's a very close call. That's just a Sugata and an overall shot of the same blade. And with this I want to just, let's go over to some, look at some Tanto and Kobas Wakizashi by Rai Kunitsugu. And even with the short swords, they're even more social than the long swords, even more than Rai Kunimitsu. As you can see here, this is the Kokuho Rai Kunitsugu famous blade. It's very midare, a very vivid hamon. That you see to a little extent with Rai Kunimitsu too, but Rai Kunitsugu really emphasized the social traditions. And you know, it's very small details. We didn't pick a very easy hobby. It's very difficult to discern the smiths sometimes. And the same here, Rai Kunitsugu, it's a Chuyo Bijutsu-hin. And with this I want to take a look at how the hamon develops from the base to the tip. So it starts pretty vivid, and then it comes down a little bit to the boshi. And in the last chapter I've shown you a Chuyo by Rai Kunimitsu, which is kind of the other way around. So Rai Kunimitsu starts a little calmer at the base, and then it turns into an accented boshi. As you can see, a white boshi, not always, but very often. So that would be one point you can distinguish Rai Kunimitsu from Rai Kunitsugu. I put the blade next to each other, as you can see here. The Rai Kunitsugu on top gets a little calmer towards the boshi, whereas Rai Kunimitsu puts the accent on the boshi. And of course, this was compared to calligraphy back in the day. So Rai Kunitsugu was compared to the calligraphy of Huai Xiu, Chinese calligrapher, very famous for the character for Ichi. You start very strong and then you phase out the brush, whereas Rai Kunimitsu, you start a little weaker and then you have the accent at the end point. So it's just a stylistic comparisons, what they always did with Japanese swords at the time. But Rai Kunitsugu also, he went full Rai occasionally. It's a pretty traditional, typical Rai blade, a Suguha hamon, the classical Furisode Nakago that curves a little bit. Also Tokubetsu Chuyo, and so he also did full Rai. So in a nutshell, if a blade looks like end of Kamakura, early Yamashiro Rai, but it's more Nie and GK, you should go for Raikkonen-Tsugu rather than Raikkonen-Mitsu, but it's very subtle. So that said, we're going to go to the middle part of this talk, which will be the other rice mills of the time. And there are a bunch, but we only have, of most of them, only like a handful of signed works. Like Kunisane, he was said to be a son of Raikkonen Toshi. There's Traitomo Kuni, Kunimune, and Mitsushige, and all these others. And one reason for why there are not that many signed works extant today is, of course, the long swords, they were all shortened. But on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, most of them were just working for the workshop. They were churning out blades, have the master sign them. So not that many are signed in their own names. Of course, I say it's Raikkonen Toshi, if you can make a nice tanto, sign it in your name, go ahead. But all the long swords, which take longer, they're gonna go to me. I'm gonna sign them, or you're gonna sign them in my name. So let's just introduce a few of those lesser known rice mills who were still around at the time. Nambokcho, early Nambokcho, like Raikunisane. It's one of the, I think, like 3 or 4 blades that are signed that exist by the Smiths. It doesn't have even a government designation. It's in the collection of the Ise Shrine, but it's Ubu and signed. Just to show you the range of his style, just to throw it in. There are a couple of signed, like Kobakisashi, like this one here, Raikunisane also signed. It's another one, it's Chuyo. And it's very difficult to develop characteristics in the workmanship if you only have like 4 signed works that exist. What you can do, like here, you can say maybe Nambokcho-esque blades in Hirosakuri that have a low hamon with a few protrusions. Maybe those we're gonna attribute to Raikunisane. That's how you would like tackle the issue of individual styles. So another smith of this category of rice smiths, not that many works exist, would be Tomokuni. He also made some Rai Tanto we have seen in the Kunidoshi and Kunimitsu chapter. It's like Kamuri Otoshi. It's very difficult to distinguish from Rai Kunimitsu. But also at the same time, he made some blades that are very similar to Nobukuni. So it's very subtle. So if you have a blade that looks like Nobukuni, but it's just maybe the quality is higher or the forging, the steel looks different. But I wouldn't go out on a limb and attribute something to Rai Tomokuni at the Kante, so because it's not that many blades out there that exist by this maker. So let's go over to the rice smiths who left Kyoto at the time. Let's go to Chudo Rai or Mitsukane. Interesting thing is with Mitsukane, no blade exists that is actually signed with Rai Mitsukane, just Mitsukane, no Rai character. And tradition has it, so that's the location where he worked at. As you can see here, it's just north of Kyoto at Mount Hiei at the Enryaku temple. And it's said he worked in this town of Sakamoto, but later he retired on to Enryakuchi, where he stayed at the temple up there. This is the temple main hall of the Enryakuchi. And interesting thing is that he still saw, if the tradition is true, he still saw the temple, the original temple that was built in the 8th century, because 100 years after him, it was burned down in the 1430s. So that's his most famous blade. It's Chuyo Bunkasen, has a nickname. It's called Midare Mitsukane because there's a lot of Midare, obviously. And the tradition is that Mitsukane was actually a student of Osafune Nagamitsu, who later moved to Kyoto to learn with the Rai smiths. And that's one reason possibly why he didn't ever sign with Rai, because he was an outsider smith who just started with Rai Kunitoshi, but he was originally an Osafune guy. And if you put those blades next to each other, you have like the Midare Mitsukane, you have a Nagamitsu and a Kanemitsu, you can see the similarities. So there is some truth to this theory that he started out in Osafune and then he went to Kyoto to study with Rai Kuritoshi. But Mitsukane also worked more in the typical Rai style, like the Suguha, classical Kamakura era Tanto shape. There's another Meibutsu, the Kuwayama Mitsukane. And that's interesting because it got its nickname from a warlord, Kuwayama Moto Haru. And he bought the blade, according to tradition, from someone living down here, so very close where Rai Mitsukane originally lived for 1,500 kan. So he bought that blade locally and he later gave it to the Tokugawa, and it got the nickname and went into the Kyoho Meibutsu as Midare Rai Mitsukane. So another one of these Exodus smiths, which is pretty well known, is Nakajima Rai, who is his smith's name was Kuninaga. And to understand those nicknames, like Mitsukane is Judo Rai and Kuninaga is Nakajima Rai, back in the day they were often referred to where they worked. So that's how those nicknames worked, because Rai Kuninaga, he moved very close to Osaka in a little area, in a little island in the river, which is called Nakajima, which literally means in the middle of the river. The island in the middle of the river, that's where he lived. And he was, when you look at the genealogy here, he was the son of Kunisue. So Kunisue was a son of Rai Kunitoshi, allegedly, and his son, Rai Kuninaga, moved to Osaka later. And so that's the Kunisue here. There are only a very few works that exist by Rai Kunisue. The most famous one is this Chuyo Bijutsu in Atachi. It's signed Rai Kunisue. He looks like a Rai Kunitoshi very much. Here I can show you Shigata, but the difference here, what they say, why it's not a Kunitoshi, is it has some Saka Ashi, because in Rai Kunitoshi, the Ashi would go the other way around, Kyosaka Ashi, and also the Nueguchi is too tight for Rai Kunitoshi. But the style is otherwise very close to Rai Kunitoshi. And when it comes to Nakajima Rai or Rai Kuninaga, if you look at the numbers again, here is a ton of Chuyo, which is a kind of it's a difficult case, because Nakajima Rai was also used traditionally as kind of a qualitative basket. So if you have a Rai blade that's in the vicinity of Rai Kunimitsu, Rai Kunitsugu, it's just not there quality-wise, they would attribute it to Nakajima Rai. That's just how it is. There are only a few Rai Kuninaga blades exist that are actually signed. So, and back in the Honami family, if you have something that looks like Rai Kunimitsu, but it's not just there, they attribute it to Nakajima Rai. That's one of the few signed longswords of Rai Kuninaga here. It's a Chuyo Bunkasai. An interesting thing here is if you can look at the monouchi and the boshi, where it gets very wide and almost ichimai. It's very similar actually to Bo Yoshihiro. I put those next to each other, the same blade before, and below is a Go Yoshihiro. And the Chuyo Bunkasai, the Rai Kuninaga, was worn by Takeda Shingen. And Takeda Shingen also liked Go Yoshihiro. So it might just be a coincidence that he liked this style with a wide monouchi and ichimai boshi, or he actively tried to collect those that look like this. But Nakajima Rai here gets a Tokubetsu Chuyo. I think that's he has two Tokubetsu Chuyo. That's one of them, the longsword. It's very much like Rai Kunimitsu again. That's the Sugata. But it went Tokubetsu Chuyo. One factor why it went that high is because it has a ton of provenance. It has a Honami origami, it has an old Honami Shirasai with Sayagaki. It came out of the Kishu Tokugawa family. And what distinguishes him from Rai Kunimitsu, Rai Kunitoshi is a lot of nagare, like you see in this blade here. I'm gonna point this out here. There's tons of nagare. And on the other side of this Tokubetsu Chuyo, even with some condition issues, some rough harder, so the provenance pretty much push it over to the Tokubetsu Chuyo papers. But it's a very good blade in any case. Another case here, it's another Chuyo that was attributed to Nakajima Rai. This one doesn't have any nagare. It has a very tight hada, very nice, a beautiful blade. It just looks like a Rai Kunimitsu, but what is different here is the boshi. They say the boshi is not similar on both sides. It's a little awkward. That's why the attribution is to Nakajima Rai and not to Rai Kunimitsu. So if you take the boshi off, I think they would totally qualify as a Rai Kunimitsu Chuyo. But it's always those edge cases. And there was also a second generation Nakajima Rai, who made blades like this with a full Nambokusho, with a real Okisake. An interesting thing is in the NYTK, they're not consistent between attributing blades to Nakajima Rai or to Rai Kuninaga directly. It just fluctuates. If a blade has Nakajima Rai Konami origami, they stay with that. They're gonna say, yeah, they're gonna Chuyo to Nakajima Rai. But sometimes they go out of the way and say, yeah, it's Kuninaga. And then there's a second generation, they sometimes point out, but there's no quality difference. They're both equally ranked. It's just a Sugata difference, like we are here later in Nambokusho. And here's an Oshigata of this blade. As you can see here, very large Kisake. And also second generation, assumedly, this Tokubetsu Chuyo is the only other blade by Rai Kuninaga or Nakajima Rai that's Tokubetsu Chuyo that's signed, and it's very much Midare. And if you can see here in the Oshigata, you can see already where the trend is going, much more towards where the Hasebe Smiths were taking over. But also Nakajima Rai can be very close to Nobukuni, like this blade here. It's pretty conservative, and you can see the steel. It has some Nagare and GK, very close to Nobukuni, but I think what made them attributed to Nakajima Rai or the Honami was the boshi differs from Nobukuni. There are a few Nobukuni blades out there with this white K-area and everything, but by trend, it's not that much seen on Nobukuni swords. So with the late Rai Smiths, it gets very difficult because we don't have that many names. The school was phasing out, and things were used as a basket for attributions like Nakajima Rai. And so I would like to end it here, and as always, gonna answer some questions if you have. Far back, or how?
I guess the newest or latest.
The latest would be end of very late Nambokusho. So second generation supposedly phasing out at the end of Nambokusho, the 1380s and 90s.
That's it. Thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah.